Here lately, it seems my Facebook feed is just filled with questions like, when should I grunt? How often should I grunt? Is it time to start rattling? And the responses were all over the board. You had some saying you should grunt every 10 minutes, to others saying just grunt whenever you feel like it. There were even some hunters saying, don't call at all, you're going to end up scaring everything away. Which, if done incorrectly, that is absolutely true. In this video, outdoor ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go over the 4 types of calls and the basics on how to use them. But first, a disclaimer. I am by no means an expert caller. This is just basic information so you can be sure that you're not overcalling or calling incorrectly and scaring away every deer in the neighborhood. Now, call type number 1 is the Estrus Bleat. Now, a bleat mimics the sound of a doe or a fawn. You might hear the sound in the woods when a doe is being chased around by a buck looking for some action. Now, if a doe starts bleating, that means she might be looking for some action too. Now, a lot of hunters think of bleat calls as something specifically for bucks, but fawns have been shown to bleat whenever they're looking for their mothers. Does will often come running into a bleat call looking for their lost fawns, so don't rule it out if you've already filled your buck tag and you have a couple doe tags left over. Now, can calls are most commonly used to make a bleat just because they're so simple to use. Just tip the can over and you'll get a consistent sound almost every time. Try 3 to 4 bleats every 20 to 30 minutes. Now, the second type of call is one that most hunters will be familiar with, the almighty grunt call. Now, bucks will grunt when fighting, chasing does, making scrapes and rubs, and whenever they feel like it. I'm sure we all know at least one guy who talks to himself, so it shouldn't be a surprise that bucks have been known to do it too. It's usually an isolated sound, one grunt here and there, but if they are chasing does, don't be surprised if they're jawing at her continuously. A grunt is a taunt. It's a challenge to other bucks in the area that as long as you don't sound too intimidating, like too much of a big mature deer, that the other deer are going to want to come check it out. The problem with sounding like too much of a mature deer, too much of an old deer, is that you'll scare off any bucks in the area that are younger. And when you're calling, you want to maximize your chances of seeing something. You want to bring stuff in, not repel anything. So that's why I like the messenger grunt call by Hook's Custom Calls. It's just got that right tone, that right pitch, that you don't sound, it's not so guttural. It doesn't sound so deep. So definitely check that one out. So when do you grunt? How many times do you grunt? Well, a general rule is 1, maybe 2 short grunts every 20 to 30 minutes. You can wait longer, just don't shorten those intervals. I know sometimes people will call when they get bored, and I've been guilty of it from time to time. Resist that urge, wait 20 to 30 minutes, and you can be sure you're not calling too much and scaring stuff away. Now, there are 2 mistakes that I hear of hunters making all the time, and everybody's been guilty of it at some point, especially when you first start calling. And the first one is calling too loud. Remember, you're not calling to a buck that's 2 counties over. You're calling to a buck that if he's not in sight, he's just over the ridge, or he just left your sight. Not only does calling too loud make the deer you're trying to imitate sound too big, but it can distort the sound so much that it almost sounds like a buck going through puberty. I mean, the range is all over the place, and they're going to know that's not real. They're not going to want any part of that. The second mistake that I hear of hunters making all the time, and I definitely was guilty of this, was calling when the deer's looking in your general direction. I used to think that it's you shouldn't call when he's looking right at you, and that's an obvious one, but no, it's in the general direction of where you're hunting. Deer have a way of being able to just pinpoint exactly where sound came from. So you want to avoid calling anytime they're looking in your general direction at all. So keep those 2 mistakes in mind, and that should help give you some confidence to know that you're not scaring away every deer in a neighborhood. Now, the third type of call is another one that a lot of you are familiar with, and that is the rattle. Now, the rattle is used to mimic a fight. It's very effective during the pre-rut when bucks are trying to establish their pecking order, to find out who really is the top dog in the area. Now, one mistake I hear hunters making is rattling too aggressively. If your rattle sounds like The Rock and Arnold Schwarzenegger from Predator going at it, you're probably scaring away deer. Now, some of you internet tough guys might be like, that ain't nothing, I could take that. If it was real life, you'd be running the other way. Now, the same thing with the grunt, or if not even more so, is don't rattle when a deer's looking in your general direction. I mean, that's just a lot of movement. You'll definitely get spotted. For a little extra realism, you can throw in a couple of grunts in the middle of your fight, and it'll just add that much more to it. Now, you're only going to want to rattle like once every hour or so. Any more than that, you give the impression that deer have their own fight club back in the woods somewhere. So remember, keep it light, only once every hour or so, and throw in a grunt call here and there to give it that extra realism, that extra drama to really bring in those deer. Now, the fourth type of deer call is the Snort Wheeze. Now, the Snort Wheeze is the ultimate dominant call. Imagine going up to somebody on the street and just saying the worst, most vile thing you can think of. That's pretty much what deer are saying to each other when they snort wheeze. Now, save this call when you know it is a big, dominant, mature buck, and he's just hung up, just out of range, and it won't work all the time, but when it does, I mean, they just puff up and they come strutting in, so you better be ready. Now, using calls doesn't have to be intimidating, and hopefully you've learned through this video that when used correctly and sparingly, calls can be just another tool in your arsenal to help you eat fewer tags and more backstrap this year.